People watch YouTube for you. And if you feel like a commodity, it's going to be very difficult to stand out. And you're functionally just praying that you're going to get lucky in that group.
Eric Villa, head of content strategy at The Studio under MKBHD, where he drives growth for digital brands in tech and the creator economy.
A lot of people getting into existential crisis mode because they're seeing all the progress with AI. How are you looking at that?
It's technology for creation. And at the end of the day, technology for creation is going to be a creator's game. YouTube behaves like communities, like network clusters, like you can even think of it like solar systems and galaxies. There's only going to be a very small percentage of creators who are the top 1%. That doesn't mean that there's a small amount of opportunity.
For a new creator who's starting in this niche, who's maybe wanting to build a business around YouTube, almost treating YouTube as like that top of funnel, what would you advise?
There's no de facto answer here, but I'll give you a few different schemas, different ways that you can think about this.
Where is the entire creator economy going with everything that's happening in AI currently, in your opinion?
Okay, so there's a few ways that you can think about this, right? The cynical way that you can think about the growth of AI in the creator economy is that it will just create this like unbounded volume of content, and it won't necessarily be like especially good. But we'll essentially have this like, digital dopamine stream going hardwired into everyone's minds. There's an existential risk for children's content in particular there, where kids really struggle to discern the difference between fiction and reality, as well as don't fully understand maybe craftsmanship or have a taste honed. And so we run the risk of children really being influenced to see AI content as superior content to humans. And that has existential risks, multiple decades down the line.
Yeah.
Short term, in terms of where adult content is going, that's can phrase that
A good oak.
short term in terms of where content for, let's say, like 18 to 45 is going, I'm very optimistic about.
Yeah.
Look at stuff like what's happening with the YouTube new wave and the creator camp people. Like, people are really starting to crack their storytelling, but running a full set with 35 people is a completely different skill set from running a YouTube channel. And AI is continuing to close that gap, where maybe you only need a set of 5 or 6 people to create a compelling short film that is of high quality. And so generally, I'm really optimistic that YouTube is going to become increasingly the premier TV solution, which in theory means that anybody could become a TV star in the next few years at a caliber and quality that we think of TV being at, or at least that it should be at. YouTube is really close, but that gap is about to fully close.
Kind of share that view though. I think what I like seeing is that the enablement AI brings is people who weren't be able to step out of the shadows up until 6 to 12 months ago are now able to, with a small team, make something actually outstanding that people can enjoy all over the world, because distribution channels are better than ever. Technology is getting better by the day. So I think it's an exciting future we're looking at. But maybe to bridge that into...
I have one more thing to add there. Could I add one more?
Yeah, sure. Go on.
So I love the fact that you mentioned distribution channels. I generally think that AI is a little overhyped and how it will fundamentally change the industry, or especially the business of the creator economy. When the electrical revolution happened, we had hundreds of new instruments that were released. And it still took decades for Jimi Hendrix to come along. And did Jimi Hendrix fundamentally change culture? Yes, but he didn't fundamentally change the economics of the music industry. No, the music industry fundamentally changed. We went from live bands to vinyl to CDs to Napster and now streaming. And the reality is, like, AI doesn't necessarily impact distribution a ton. There's nuances there. Obviously, recommendation algorithms are a function of AI, and they're going to increasingly try to feed people more of the same because the AI knows that that's predictable and safe. But in general, no one freaked out when we figured out how to put a cinema camera, the Sony FX3, in the hands of anybody with a few $1,000s and very basic camera skills. AI doesn't feel like it's a leap, absolutely, but it's the same genre of leap. Creating better vehicles for content creation doesn't always translate to fundamental changes in the economics or who's the winners and losers in the space. At the end of the day, good storytellers who understand how to connect with their audience are still going to be the people who win.
Yeah. Fully agree. I think the impact of AI is often over anticipated, and what people tend to forget is that the adoption curve is determined by all the businesses out there. When it's whether it's about content creation or your mom and pop shop at the corner of the street, those businesses determine the adaptation or the adoption curve, basically. And we have ways to go there, and I think we're far away from having systems in place in every business around the world where no human intervention is required anymore. We still need that to determine the right intent of wherever we're employing AI.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. It's a long game. I like it. Nobody knows exactly what's going to change, but I can't help but feel like a lot of the fundamentals are going to remain the same.
Maybe to get back into the conversation on AI adoption, etc. How are you using at MKBHD and all the things you're doing? I'm a big fan, by the way. Watched many and many of Marquess's video. How are you employing AI currently? Like optimizing workflows, anything, be careful with it. How do you look at that?
In general, I'd say that we are constantly testing new products, but our goal is to make the best content humanly possible. And when you rely too much on AI, you're naturally going to get mediocre content, middle of the road content, right? Anytime you rely too heavily on whether it's like a preset in an editing program or a script formula that you have perfectly down, you're going to create content that feels predictable, formulaic, and eventually maybe burns out your audience. AI is in a similar camp to that, where because it's so easy to use, you run the risk of overusing it and then creating content that feels a bit like a commodity. So I personally use it for a little bit of research, a little bit of like brainstorming a title. I'll give it 6 keywords that I know are outlier keywords, and then we'll find ways to combine them in ways that are useful. But for the most part, I'd say that we're pretty intentional about making sure that our content leans into the fact that we have professionals who've been working on this for a really long time. And we do our best to lean into the domain expertise and years of expertise that we have with our team. I think AI is super, super huge for raising the floor for content, but in terms of punching above and really trying to be best of the best of the best, years of experience haven't really been able to be replaced. Maybe that changes, but I don't fully see evidence that may be the case, just with the way that these generative models work.
I was just saying that segues really nicely into obviously growing on YouTube. Obviously, I know you're striving for the best content, and I think you're very much putting that out. But I'm concerned with your ideation process. I speak to quite a lot of people about this, and I think it was Jenny who said she has anywhere from, granted she's short form, but I think she said she has anywhere from 300 ideas a week. And I guess I want to know what that sort of assembly line looks for you at the studio, where what ideas are making it through to the pipeline.
Yeah, so the channel that I specifically run is called the Studio Channel, and ideas are really critical because our videos don't regularly feature the same people. So people have to watch us both for like the editing, the brand value of the studio itself, as well as the topics. That's how you bring people into our universe, because we don't regularly have like familiar faces where people would click on it even if maybe the subject isn't as interesting to them. So because of that, oftentimes my ideation process is a lot of start on YouTube itself. See what the platform is telling me. I don't like touching view stats. I don't like touching 1out-of-10.com. I don't like touching ChatGPT. Nothing until I go on YouTube and I just find videos that I think our audience is already watching. What this looks like in a really tactical way is I have multiple burner accounts for different niches that I think our audience watches, and I just see what YouTube feeds us in browse features, find interesting outliers, make sure that the account is watching mostly outliers so that I'm fed most of them. And that just helps sort of keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening in terms of trends, genre conventions, packaging, and topics that people want in tech, where things are especially competitive. The thing about ideation in tech is the best ideas are only really useful for half of the year, because the other half of the year, you just need the best turnaround time possible. You just need to make that phone review and get it out by embargo. And so on the Studio Channel, it's a lot of thinking through what is a topic that people like and how does adding a full ensemble of people actually make that topic better and not feel like we're sort of ham-fisting it. I usually go through maybe 6 or 7 ideas a month, and we land on one that we want to produce as our long form each month.
I'm curious to know what that process really looks like, though. Let's say take a new YouTuber, for example. Obviously, this idea of trying to find outliers in specific niches. How do you really go by that, though? And let's take for instance someone who is making content in tech. Maybe they don't have that ceiling or that audience base that they're obviously looking for. What would be the best process to actually find these outliers? I mean, would you suggest something like vidIQ's extension? And also, how are you translating those package ideas into something like tech, perhaps?
So my basic workflow is I have my burner account where I just watch tech videos. I see which videos are outliers on that. Usually I'll have the 1 out of 10 extension. So I can very quickly spot when something is a major outlier. And then from there, I will just go into view stats and I'll type in that keyword and see if there are other outliers in this niche. In something like entertainment or maybe even business, finding 6 or 7 outliers is probably a good indicator that something is done. In tech, things move pretty quickly, and audiences are also tend to congregate to a small percentage of videos. Once they see one tech review or one concept explored, they can get tired of it quickly. So I'm only looking for maybe 2 or 3 other instances of outliers. If we see 5 or 6 times that people have made outliers about a subject, I typically then disregard it because I assume that there's no alpha in that trade anymore, and there isn't really a demand from the audience anymore. It seems like it'd be satiated. So just to make it super clear, I use YouTube to feed me outlier accounts. I use 1 out of 10 to sort through what I'm given on browse features and find those outliers. Then I go into view stats and I see if those topics, thumbnails, or concepts are doing well on just a couple other videos, or if those topics, thumbnails, and concepts are oversaturated.
I guess my final question on that idea of like ideation is obviously packaging, so typing and the thumbnail conventions. I mean, obviously there's a myriad of frameworks that you can follow. I mean, I like Paddy Galloway's hallmark of ideas. That's something that we definitely follow, and it's proven to be useful. But I'm curious to know how that process really works. When you have an idea, you've finished it, it's ready to be packaged. What frameworks are you following? How are you trying to hit that higher ceiling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, the thing that you always have to remember is in our space, you have to know why people are clicking on a video. And that genre convention looks like focusing on the tech and figuring out how do we very quickly tell a story about this technology that would make people want to stay. And then through the course from the packaging to the first 45 seconds or so, we take them from tech and we sort of bring them into our world and introduce them to personalities. Too much personality in an educational or utilitarian video feels distracting. So you need to make sure that people understand where the focus is. So the way that I think about packaging with pretty much everything we do is how can we make the star of this technology? And then how do we support talking about that technology in the story of the videos themselves or the format or however we sort of discuss it. So really tactically, that just looks like packaging where you really predominantly feature a product and then ask yourself what genre conventions from other parts of YouTube can you pull from. The thing I like about thumbnails is you can pull outlier video compositions from thumbnails in completely separate niches and bring it into your own world. So I've taken like math tutorial videos and then taken those and combined it with a tech review video, and it's created some really, really fun thumbnails. But generally, I mean, I think our big focus is just always figure out where the focal point is. That's always going to be the product. And then figure out how every other asset can make sure that your eyes are driven to that focal point.
You touched on an interesting topic there, the topic of personality and too much personality being somewhat off-putting, if that's the right term.
Yeah. I maybe off-putting isn't the right word. It's like going into a new friend group or like going to a friend's house and each other. Like it's just uncomfortable. Yeah. And so you want to make sure that like everyone feels like they're comfortable. You want to make sure that the audience feels like no matter how much they know about who's there, they could participate. Tech in particular has really, really tight communities. And so you need to find that balance between building community and making sure that people are really excited about it, but also not having so many inside jokes that it feels like nobody else could hang out. You know what I mean?
Makes sense. On that topic, how do you, with like obviously like scaling efforts in terms of channels, videos, everything you guys are doing, how do you maintain the right balance in personality throughout team, throughout culture? Like, do you guys have like guidelines on how to achieve that? Any specific pointers?
I think for us, the big thing is trust. We really actively do our best to not label ourselves as journalists, but also do everything in our power to get primary sources from journalists who are like very vetted and great professionals. We regularly vet our sponsors in a really, really aggressive way. For us, it's just important that people know that we really deeply care about the audience and do everything in our power to service them. Those are our real bosses. Marquez is just another personality here. And so, yeah, I think for us, it's just constant audience empathy. It's constant audience intuition. It's reading a lot of comments, which can sometimes be frustrating.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the simplest way that we kind of keep aligned. And luckily, we're a small team, so it's not like we have like a ton of SOPs or like really intensely written out thoughts for how we sort of produce our content. There's this natural intuition for how each audience behaves in the comments, behaves with the content, what they like, what they don't, and how we could expand those. So intuition is never like the most fun answer, but the answer really is just like figure out how to build trust. And when the audience feels like their trust is broken, they'll tell you. You need to listen and act accordingly as quickly as possible.
On the topic of trust and listening to the community, having a finger at the pulse, basically, I think someone last year, don't know if it's a touchy subject, but I'm just going to ask the question. You guys, or Marquess, because his name was attached to it, released that wallpaper. Can't find the name currently, but that got some pretty big backlash, I think, from the community. Now, obviously, it's easy to attach like big backlash to someone with a big name if something is subpar, or the community thinks it's subpar, and it might be unfair compared to other people doing stuff out there. You always have like a big light shining on you. But in cases of such a storm hitting, how do you navigate it?
Yeah, I think it's the answer to the prior question. So for me, my perspective was, I'd hear about the app and then I'd be like, okay, let's focus on the studio channel, right? That's like, that's sort of my focus day to day. And I think when the app was released, I sort of got the interesting perspective of essentially just being a fly on the wall, right? Yeah. There wasn't much I could have done through any of that process. So I just got to sort of watch it. I was pretty impressed, and I guess my respect for the team grew very quickly when within about 3 hours, the frustration, the feeling subsided, and they just sat down, huddled, and said, okay, here's the product feedback. How do we iterate quickly? And that's not dissimilar from products that we review. We love a comeback story. We love it when we can say, this is a good product. How could it be great? This is a bad product, and seeing a product become better. And so it was very cool to see that iteration process go into work really quickly. At the time, I was working on the biggest studio video we'd ever done. It's this hour-long video about how we produce our videos. It really relies on brand equity. Like, you have to trust Marquez in order to watch the video. And so we were just sort of holding the video, putting final touches on it, just like spending a bunch of time putting polish that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise. And then they pushed their update to the app. Marquez published his video talking about launch and clarifying a lot of the communication there. And then we were able to publish our hour-long mega video. And I think it created a lot of goodwill really quickly because the audience recognized that we want to do good work. And they recognized that just because the product was lackluster doesn't mean that there was an inherently sort of nefarious intent. And so I was just really appreciative. I remember coming away from that experience being like, okay, like, it's truly as simple as make sure that people trust you for as much as you can, as much as humanly possible. Do whatever you can to maintain trust. It's really not dissimilar from having a relationship where somebody trusts you. If you mess up,
fully agree.
Relationship, you find a way to bounce back. So it was cool getting to be on the sidelines, and that video that we were working on the studio channel, I think, turned out great. And a big reason why it did was honestly maybe holding it and just spending time really focusing on it.
That's epic.
One thing I care about a lot is practical application and guidance for smaller creators. And obviously, it's very easy to expect viral growth or, meaningful growth at scale when you have very solid SOPs, obviously big assembly lines in place. But not everyone has that, obviously. And I'm concerned with the podcast space specifically. And I mean, as I'm sure you know, there are a lot of moving parts. that constitute a good quality show, let alone obviously a YouTube channel. I guess one thing I care about a lot is making sure that people understand that micro focus and tight niche content is paramount and prevails, because obviously this idea of virality being the thing that people should be striving for. But I actually caveat that with Jenny in the podcast, obviously all about trying to create viral shorts. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how strong of a foundation do you think channels should be having when starting? So take a new, smaller creator, for instance. What should they really be aiming for on YouTube, especially in 2025? I mean, I'm a big proponent of these micro channels we're now seeing, especially in the business space. You're having your Imran Ghazi business, you're having your Charlie Morgan business. The premise isn't really on views. People aren't trying to chase as many views as possible. They're trying to obviously get those meaningful eyeballs and then bring them into a bigger ecosystem, almost treating YouTube as like that top of funnel. I guess what I'm getting at is for a new creator who's starting in this niche, who's maybe wanting to build a business around YouTube, what would you advise? What have you seen worked on your end?
Okay, so there's no de facto answer here, but I'll give you a few different schemas, different ways that you can think about this. Let's say you want to be a pure play creator business where it's a sponsorships or maybe even subscription revenue oriented business, and you functionally need some form of scale in order for it to be sustainable. Even if that looks like having a Patreon, you need an audience that you can convert there. If that's the case, then it's more about what you shouldn't do. You're going to get a lot of advice on finding outlier videos, picking an outlier topic, out executing, but people don't talk about the fact that finding those outlier videos is great, but then you need to execute in a way that's unique and in a way that people haven't seen before. Typically that looks like a combination of genres that you wouldn't expect to see before. Preston Goes is like probably one of the best case studies here. A lot of his videos are based on finding these excellent outliers, these sort of pockets of YouTube that you wouldn't think could do views, but do these, tens of millions of views, but it's just not enough to recreate those videos. He brings music and engineering and fun into this sort of package to create extremely unique videos. And so constantly ask yourself, if you're a new creator, how am I combining genres in a way where I'm executing in an extremely unique way? People watch YouTube for you. People watch YouTube for people. And if you feel like a commodity, if you feel like you're just one in a couple, even 100 other people, it's going to be very difficult to stand out. And you're functionally just praying that you're going to get lucky in that group. Figure out how you can be one of one if you want to be a media business. If you are anything that's not a media business, if your business model is something that's not media and you're functionally just adding media on top of it, the general rule is the longer people watch, the more that should correlate into high value clients. So if you really have a high LTV product, if you have essentially high customer acquisition cost product, then I would highly recommend going for the longest possible content that you can produce, while also still getting some form of quality.
Yeah, interesting. I guess, what about from a B2B perspective?
So I was just doing a consultation. I was working on some content marketing with a B2B. It's a really distributed market. They work with like essentially small businesses, like 3 to maximum 7 people in these businesses scattered all across the country. Very, very difficult to find people. Generally, I'd say you probably want to start in communities where there's still discovery. So stuff like Facebook groups, Reddit groups. You want to find sort of like pre-established community there so you can really understand people's pain points. And then you can get a flywheel going, maybe build your own community and then build a content stack on top of that. So I'd functionally start with mid-funnel. If the bottom of the funnel is the product. Then I'd work on a top of funnel. Again, because B2B tends to be really high LTV products. So focus on a content marketing strategy where you can produce revenue from that content as quickly as possible and very attributable revenue as quickly as possible. Because once you have just a few high LTV clients, focusing on an impressions campaign is just going to be more valuable, because all the impressions and top of funnel stuff does is make your conversion on the mid funnel, which is already working in a good machine, even higher. So build up the mid funnel first and then build up to the top of funnel.
Following up on that, in a world where new content creators start out and those specific micro niches might be something the heart's actually going out to and that they're interested in. How do you prevent, or what advice would you give people on preventing to chase the millions of views, prevent chasing the big numbers, and instead try to find something that actually fulfills you in terms of content you're creating?
I mean, I think the answer is maybe right there, right? The reality is, like, I'll talk to a lot of people and you say, okay, what are your goals for YouTube? They say, well, I want to grow my business. And then it's, okay, here's this strategy. It's, we're going to net you 40,000 to, maybe 100,000 views on an outlier per video. We're going to do weekly videos. You're going to convert a few thousand people into clients that'll convert into however much revenue, blah, blah, blah. And then people will be like, well, but I want to be growing more. And so then you pitch them concepts. This is classic in business because the funnel for business, and this poses like some existential kind of scary risk to how people think about business entrepreneurship. But the funnel for business is start with something really specific, and then you just do business in general, and then you do like personal finance, and then you do self-development, and then you're like, and then that's like the guru pipeline, right? So there's there's a degree to where I say, like, it's okay to have a few tentpole pieces. The reality is nearly every YouTube channel you look at, when you scatter plot their videos, their top performing videos are going to be the vast majority of performance. 2 or 3 videos are going to be upwards of 15 to 20% of your net growth on a YouTube channel. So it's okay to do a few top of funnel pieces, but you need to recognize that there's going to naturally sort of be this curve. And the only way you don't see that curve is if you're going through like a massive growth period where every single video is an outlier. But even then, there will come a point where you're tired of making those videos, or your audience is tired of watching them, and you'll start to see this retraction again. So the universe exists on a power law. The universe exists on this concentration of attention. And I would generally say there's nothing wrong with doing top of funnel or going for views, especially in the early days. But those are just always going to be extremely broad videos. It's going to be extremely difficult to stand out, particularly in business contexts where you might not want to sing a new song in every video or something that's particularly creatively unique. So yeah, if you'd like, we could do some follow-up questions to kind of to boil that down into something more concise, because I have a lot of feelings about this. It drives me crazy when people want to chase views, but they also have a business model where they couldn't even capture the vast majority of it.
I think what happens there is people set out a goal they start with and they just simply forget, right? And instead of recognizing the point of saturation where they're like, shit, I'm sick of doing this, and go back to what initially drove them to start doing content, they look out at these views and these attainable or these unattainable numbers and go chase that, keep losing track of what they actually like doing, and just start probably developing a large imposter syndrome because they're looking up against all these channels that are doing millions and millions, and they're just lost in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think the thing that I try to remind people is YouTube Studio will try and convince you that growing on YouTube is this race up, right? They give you data that says, oh, you had an up month or a down month, which is kind of BS too.
Yeah.
You have a down month because you just had 3 months of absolutely insane outlier.
Yeah.
You're coming back down to a mean that maybe is still higher than what your mean was 4 months ago. So the YouTube UX itself makes you think that YouTube growth on YouTube is like a straight line, but you need to remember that the way that YouTube works is it's a network. It uses user behavior YouTube uses user behavior to sort of categorize each niche and sort of connect how each video is connected based on how many people in an audience watch it and complete it. All that to say, YouTube really isn't a race up, it's a race to the center. YouTube behaves like communities, like network clusters, like you can even think of it like solar systems and galaxies, right? You have the densest mass, which is going to be the largest creator in a niche, and then you have a bunch of creators surrounding those creators with their own individual sort of planetary systems, their own individual sub-niches, their own individual atmospheres, and then around those planets are asteroid belts and moons and different sort of entities that gravitate around those. So these platforms are, in truth, it's a race to the center. It's a race to, if you want a bigger audience, you want to ask, how can I be at the center of a larger and larger culture, a larger and larger conversation? But a lot of people think that it's a race up and that they're competing against themselves, but they don't take the time to recognize how these platforms are structured as a whole, and just the simple fact that there's only going to be a very small percentage of creators who are the top 1% of creators, but that doesn't mean that there's a small amount of opportunity. You could be anywhere along the power law chart, anywhere in that solar system, and find a very sustainable business.
I think to link that back to something you said a bit earlier, it's okay to do a bunch of those or a couple of those top of funnel videos with the right intent, and then come back to where you officially started off to broaden your view, branch out a bit, and then consolidate back into what matters to you, your channel, and what you're trying to build. I guess to connect it up and sum it all up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm fascinated, obviously, with automation and faceless. And I know this guy here does ridiculous numbers on faceless. He's got a really, really good system going. I think with the emergence of AI and tying back to, I guess, the beginning of this podcast, I'm really curious to know where YouTube's going to go. I mean, I think for a lot of people, they don't even realize that they're consuming content that is probably 80% AI. I mean, even at the front end at times now, you're having obviously AI voiceovers, AI captions, maybe AI avatars. I guess if that's starting to become the norm, where do you think things are going to go?
I think culture's fickle. I think that'll become the norm until people get bored.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also very difficult because we don't have data on how these platforms work holistically. Like, we don't know if the norm on most platforms is just like thirst traps or something, because we don't like fully understand the scope or scale of how much of like how certain niches or types of content are distributed across platforms. Faceless content might be really big for your guys' feed or a big conversation within the entrepreneurship space, but we don't know how much of that is confirmation bias because you guys are interested in it, and then you're fed more, and then it appears as if this is the entirety of the internet. But the reality is, maybe we're just looking at the fishbowl from inside the water. So it's just really difficult. There's no quantifiable answer, and so I think anybody who answers that with like pure conviction probably has some sort of financial interest in or against faceless content. I think there will probably be faceless content, and there will probably be someone who gets so good at prompt engineering that the faceless content's really good and it's fun and it's cool and there's characters, and they find ways to program it in a way where maybe there's a new form of artistry to it. At the end of the day, we're so early right now that there's exclusively sort of opportunists in this space, but people tend to gravitate towards things that are inherently subversive. So we're creating a norm that will be ready to be subverted in a few months or a year.
Makes total sense. I think you touched up on an interesting psychology topic there in terms of people being surrounded by something, people being in a bubble and seeing that as a true reality. And I see that happening in a lot of the AI space currently as well. A lot of people getting into existential crisis mode because they're seeing all the progress with AI, but they don't ask themselves, okay, what's the reality of this yet? How are you looking at that? And do you see the same thing happening on your end?
Nobody who owned telephoto lenses panicked when we started selling 200 megapixel cameras where you could like really easily crop your image later.
I love that analogy.
Nobody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is new distribution, or this is new technology for content creation, and that means that content creators will win. I cannot be more bullish on it, because frankly, the only people I've ever met who said, "Oh, AI is going to replace content creators," are people who do not consume content very regularly. So they're just not the market. They're just pundits. It's technology for creation. And at the end of the day, technology for creation is going to be a creator's game. When distribution fundamentally changes, when platforms exclusively want to feed AI content because for whatever reason it's more profitable, or they don't have to do a revenue share, or somebody does some algebra somewhere, that's when we can start to panic. But I don't see a universe where those economics check out anytime soon.
I think the advice I'd like to give to people stuck in that bubble is step out of it. go outside, take a walk, and ditch those platforms, because social media can be very valuable. Being stuck in such a bubble just doesn't help. It brings imposter syndrome, and it doesn't bring you anything good. Just focus on what you enjoy doing, and just go do it, instead of sitting around waiting.
I think one other thing that's really important here is the conversation around AI replacing people. It typically starts on X and then it transitions to like LinkedIn, right? That's one sort of cohort of people.
Around the 2 week circle. Yeah,
exactly. Go on Threads, nobody's talking about that. Go on Noster or a federated vehicle for conversation, and nobody's talking about that. The thing about the way that conversational platforms or these town square platforms has gone is that there's like 7 different towns, and each town is telling you that 1 or 2 things are the future. And the reality is we don't have one centralized town square anymore where we see multiple people talking about conversation. And so we're particularly susceptible to filter bubbles right now. Not just in like political context that they've been explored, but also business context.
All bubbles, fully agree. Yeah, and to be quite honest, like point of being humble there, I've been in those bubbles as well. I think Jasper has been in those bubbles as well, texting me late at night. Shit, man, what's going on? Jesus, another tool is being launched. Like, how do we keep track of all of this? And I just keep saying to myself and to others around me, just stop and breathe for a second. Don't try to keep track of everything, because the market's moving so fast. There's no point in trying to be up to date to everything.
The Marquess is a very good leader because the only question that he asks is, he only asks really 2 questions when it comes to making a video. Is this something the audience wants? How can we make this the best video possible? That's it. We don't ask about budget. We don't think about sponsorship integration. We don't think about going and optimizing for CPMs, because over the long term, if you just say, I want to service an audience better than anybody else can, it's very tough. It's pretty tough. So, I never like to speak in generalities. There's absolutely existential risks when it comes to AI. The existential risks in creative spaces, I just haven't met a person who is a creative person who regularly watches content and appreciates content who feels that AI is an existential risk.
Curious to know, I know you're obviously tight for time. I want to know what's going on for you. So, I was looking at your experience, and fair play, by the way. You've been in this strategy consulting space for, is it excess of 6 years, 7 years? I'm going off what's public, but must be longer than that, I'm sure.
I'm in my mid-20s. I started making YouTube videos when I was 13, and
like all of us.
I have the gift of gab. My first YouTube channel was called Blabberhead. So I don't know. I guess I've just been doing this for like my whole life, man.
Well, what's your path? I'm curious to know what sort of inset for you. Obviously, I know you play a pivotal role in the studio, but I'm curious to know, is there going to be space for your own content? And what have you got sort of in the pipeline?
My big focus right now is education. So I went to traditional film school because I didn't really feel like there was any other curriculum that was closer to what I wanted to do. I think I always wanted to be some form of a YouTuber, and I also wanted some form of higher education. I think it's important to have a liberal arts education, and it's really frustrating that we live in this world where the most opportunity in media is also this like relegated universe where education has to be on the internet, and there aren't these in-person legacy spaces that can accredit people and, give them education on other topics that could make them more worldly individuals. So I want to go to academia, particularly academia outside of sort of the coasts in the US, places like the Midwest or the South, where I think there's tons of opportunity for a lot of creative people to come on the internet, but we haven't found ways to legitimize this path. And I want as many people as possible who don't have access to Hollywood sets and a bunch of capital in New York to be able to find a way to produce income from doing creative work on the internet. And to me, that looks like providing more education in more sustainable and trusted ways for as many people as possible. So right now I'm focused on how I can break into academia and start helping academics navigate this world in a way where students are encouraged to join it with integrity and just understand the opportunities and the risks of the space in a way that I didn't felt was fully there when I was going to school.
I think that speaks nicely to, if you take a new creator now, maybe watching this, who is sort of maybe on the fence as to whether he should start or they should start on YouTube or not. I guess what would be your biggest reasons to, what are you bullish about in this space?
This is a really interesting question. This is a really, really interesting question. So, so in film school, people would say, write what you know, right? The best screenplays come from personal experience, from an understanding of maybe yourself, your own emotional intelligence, your worldview, life experiences. I think that rule still applies to the internet. Create what you know. Create what you watch. Be a part of communities and really deeply engage with them, and magical things can start to happen. I think that's why we see so many current YouTubers start as tech YouTubers, because there's this strong community where a few thousand people will seed your audience and give you a little bit of encouragement. And even if you're just talking to 1,000 people every week in the tech space, you learn about the fundamentals of speaking to a community, and then you can kind of later find your space and find your groove. So I would say, get into this space because you love something. You know what I mean? Because you care about something. And then once you have that and you understand that community, then start to figure out how you can execute in a way where you're combining genre conventions in ways that nobody's ever seen before. The studio channel is like reality TV plus tech YouTube videos. It makes no sense whatsoever, but I freaking love Love Island and I love tech YouTube videos. So I'm going to combine them for as long as the audience will let me.
I mean, I think a lot of value has been shared there. I guess it's not even a case of where people can find you. Obviously, people know the brand, but maybe they don't know you as the spearhead behind it. But obviously, any links we can include. And I guess what's sort of like the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, I would say you can check out my Instagram below at eric.p.v. More interesting than that, I recently launched a little AI product that I just thought would be fun. If you go to my website, ericpv.com, you can upload any audio or text file. It's ideally teaching somebody something, and then it'll give you an outline for a YouTube video that should be
Oh, wow.
give you a title that's curated on titles that I've written successfully over my few years. So rather than worry about hiring me or anything, it's totally free. Just go sign up and get a product for free.
Do you mind elaborating a bit more on that? I wish we had spoken about that prior. That sounds really interesting. What's the score on that?
Dude, so I launched it on April Fool's on my LinkedIn. I said I had a baby.
On my birthday.
Yeah. By the way, don't do that. There's no room for sarcasm on LinkedIn. I had so many family members reach out and be like, why were you keeping
Oh my God, yeah.
But yeah, no. A lot of my process is just like speaking and thinking, and it's very difficult to distill. I think the thing about writing a good YouTube video is the audience needs to know where it's going and why they're constantly watching and understand the arc of the story as a whole. And so I just sort of created this simple sort of prompting template that breaks concepts down into really key, tangible takeaways that are easy for somebody to sort of focus on and write. And then you pair that with an overall retention strategy. Essentially, I help people tell micro stories and then a larger story that ties the whole video together. And that's sort of the logic behind that product. It was just, really intense prompt engineering for a few weeks, and then working with the brilliant Oliver Miller and a designer friend, David Federspiel, to put together the website. It's based on like early 2000s core, very nostalgic, full websites. So yeah, I just wanted to make something that was fun and not like scary and not like some crazy lead gen, but ideally something that could help people who want to teach people in the context of YouTube. And help those educators maybe navigate the platform and make content that feels like it's more native to what's happening on YouTube.
What's it called?
Just go to my website, ericpv.com, and it'll reroute. Eventually, I'm going to launch like Eric AI, like full product, but I just took...
It sounds like it has a lot of utility. It sounds like something that you could really release at bigger scale. I mean, it sounds like something I would be wanting to use for sure.
Yeah, we're in MVP stages right now. Like, I'm just trying to see if there's real tangible traction. And then from there, I think the simple product or like the simple play here is I'm going to make it free for as long as humanly possible. And if people really like the prompting there, imagine what they could do if, they wanted to bring me on to drive content strategy for them.
Thank you so much.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.